Hello, welcome back to the channel. I want to start off with a little story. My favorite show as a kid was Cartoon Network's Ed, Edd, and Eddy. Now follow me here. I watched it frequently every chance I got, whenever it was on Cartoon Network. It was my favorite show. I found it so funny. The animation style was so unique. It was very well written. I watched it all throughout its peak, basically, when I was 6, 7, 8, 9. To this day, I can never really pin down what it was that drew me to the show. I guess it was the characters. The characters were very well written. I loved Ed. I always got a kick out of Ed. Not too long ago, I rewatched the series, season 1 through 5 seasons total. I would say the best seasons are probably 3 and 4. Those are probably the smartest episodes written for the show. It's funny watching it back as an adult because you realize, because as a kid, you're like, you can't understand a single thing Double D is saying. But as an adult, you hear some of his dialogue. It's like the smartest stuff ever. Just logic, reason, and empathy. See, the show's dynamic revolves around 3 main characters. Eddy, whose entire motivation is greed and making money, even if it means tossing aside any moral value, any regard for any consequences of his actions. And throughout the course of the show, he gets Ed to help him out with his scams. Meanwhile, you have Double D there, who has a very distinct moral code, just trying to talk Eddy out of the scams with logic and deductive reasoning, getting Eddy to understand the consequences of his actions. The show was very well written, and not only did it teach a lot of good morals, it also taught empathy and logic and reasoning. And it's not okay to be greedy all the time because the effects are awful. The effects are awful. Now, my dad, and I love my dad, don't get me wrong, he didn't like me watching that show. And I will never, ever forget him telling me this. I didn't understand why. I asked him, why don't you want us to watch the show, me and my brothers? And he says, because it insults your intelligence. And at first, I really didn't understand what that meant. But now, as an adult, looking back, he wasn't wrong, because it is a very smart show. Now, what does this have to do with Ben Shapiro? Well, Ben Shapiro has a couple of hot takes when it comes to empathy. Not only that, but my dad recently revealed to me that I should try watching him. And I have known about Ben Shapiro for years, and hearing him tell me that, and the fact that he's actually unironically watching Ben Shapiro is very troubling to me. So we're going to take a look at Ben Shapiro's recent statements, as well as some statements that he said regarding empathy a couple years ago, and we're going to break it down and how it relates to politics today.
There's only one problem, okay? Empathy is actually kind of bad for politics. The reason that empathy is bad for politics is because it leads you to empathize with people that you are more likely to like, as opposed to people you don't like.
What? Who are you more likely to like, Ben? That's so subjective. Like, everyone is going to like different people. What are you talking about?
Okay, so first of all, the pitch for empathy is actually, there have been several books that are written on this, social science books, talking about how empathy is not actually the best thing for politics. It actually almost deactivates the reasoning centers of your brain.
Can you please cite these books? I am very interested in looking them up.
Because when you're empathetic, you don't actually create good policy. This doesn't mean that feeling sympathy for people is a bad thing. It means that if empathy is what drives your policy making, you're probably not acting in a rational fashion.
Let's look up the definition of empathy real quick, shall we? Empathy, according to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, the action of understanding, being aware of, being sensitive to, and vicariously experiencing the feelings, thoughts, and experience of another of either the past or present, without having the feelings, thoughts, and experience fully communicated in an objectively explicit manner. And there's a link right here that says, what is the difference between empathy and compassion? Compassion is a broader word. It refers to both an understanding of another's pain and the desire to somehow mitigate that pain. It's somewhat of a synonym. And for the difference between sympathy and empathy are closely related words bound by shared origins and the similar circumstances in which each is applicable, yet they are not synonymous. For one thing, sympathy is considerably older than empathy, having existed in our language for several hundred years before its cousin was introduced, and its greater age is reflected in a wider breadth of meaning. Sympathy may refer to feelings of loyalty, or unity or harmony in action or effect, meanings not shared by empathy. In the contexts where the two do overlap, sympathy implies sharing or having the capacity to share the feelings of another, while empathy tends to be used to mean imagining or having the capacity to imagine feelings that one does not actually have. So empathy basically means put yourself in other people's shoes. Imagine what they're going through. How do they live their day-to-day lives? What are they going through?
But the real goal here is, of course, not to generate empathy. The real goal here is to suggest that if you disagree with the idea that America is systemically and institutionally racist, you are not an empathetic person, and therefore you're a bad, cruel, and callous person. Right? The idea is that empathy is really about, it's really a moral statement about what kind of good person you are.
So this is my biggest contention when it comes to Ben here. He says, when you're making policy from the standpoint of being empathetic, if empathy is what drives your politics, automatically, like, you don't have good politics at all. Why is he making this argument? Why is empathy bad? Why is having compassion for others, understanding the struggles that others are feeling, understanding the torment and the suffering that lots of people have to go through, or just everyday struggles, like, I can empathize with someone going hungry. I can empathize with someone losing their job. I can empathize with someone whose car broke down. My empathy shapes my politics. Ben Shapiro doesn't have empathy. And this is the single biggest problem with the conservative movement, because they don't care about anyone. They do not empathize with anyone. They're in it for themselves. Well, as long as I get mine. You should only work to enrich yourself. You know, power of the individual.
Capitalism.
Collectivism. Yeah. Cooperating for the greater good of humanity and the country and society as a whole. Fuck that. So we're going to take another look at a video from a couple years ago. He was asked about empathy for the other side. He was talking about how empathy was done at the Young America's Foundation.
Hi, Ben. Thanks for coming. A common criticism liberals, or particularly progressives, often levy at conservatives is the absence of compassion, so to speak, in the formation of our policies, especially under Trump. So what is your position on if compassion over logic, perhaps, or
empathy is
whatever
stupid.
balance?
So, I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, empathy is dumb. The reason I say this is not because I don't have empathy for people. It's because you should not make policy based on who you care most about. If I did, I would take all of your money and give it to my kids. I like them better than I like you.
Ben, I care about everybody. I care about every single human being on this planet. I want everybody to be happy. I want everybody to be comfortable, safe, and secure. If that makes me a radical, if that makes me a bleeding heart liberal or a fucking communist, so be it.
The fact is that, I mean, there's an entire book on empathy that's specifically about why empathy in policy is a problem.
Is it by Ayn Rand?
Sympathy is fine, right? Having sympathy for people is good. Having empathy for people is not great. The distinction being, if you have sympathy, you feel bad for someone. If you have empathy, you put yourself in the shoes of that person. But by doing so, you are now not in the shoes of everybody else.
Oh, you can only be selectively empathetic. Okay, that's how empathy works. I can't empathize with folks on the countryside that live out in the middle of nowhere and their farm equipment broke down or they're struggling to pay their bills. Ben, are you projecting here? Are you saying that you can only be selectively empathetic?
The best policy that can be made is the policy that is about, you know, the data and the number of people who are affected, because you can always find the person who's the most victimized and then make policy around that person, as opposed to trying to create policy that affects the most people in the most beneficial way.
See, the thing is, Ben, when it comes to healthcare and when it comes to covering people with healthcare, your country, your nation, your society, it's only as safe, it's only as protected as your least insured person. This pandemic is a shining example of that sentiment. What's wrong with shaping policy that's shaped around the most vulnerable, the ones that are struggling the most destitute, the people who are the worst off? What's wrong with that?
So, I mean, it's great to be empathetic. I don't see empathy as much of a moral value as some other people do. I don't think feelings are in and of themselves moral values. I think behavior is moral much more than feelings. Maybe this is my Judaic background, but Judaism is much more an acts-based religion than a grace-based religion, meaning that in my religious viewpoint, I think that God cares much more about what you do than how you feel about it. I think politically speaking, some of the worst things that have ever happened were based on good intentions.
So if that's the case, Ben, by what you do policy-wise, if it doesn't benefit the most people possible under your nation, under your government, your entire citizenry, then what's the point of politics? What's the point of getting in there and making a change? becoming a representative, becoming a senator, becoming the president, if you're not in there to make life better for your most worst off citizens? What's the point? Empathy is dangerous because if I become too empathetic, I might start actually caring about the homeless and the hungry and the impoverished.
And so, trying to formulate policy that is the best without violating people's rights is a better way of doing policy than saying, I empathize with this group of people or this particular person, and therefore I'm going to shift policy to meet them there.
Just reiterating his nonsense. See, that's the thing. That's why conservatives don't have any new ideas, and Ben Shapiro proved it with his BBC interview. They lack imagination, and imagination is crucial in empathy. And that's why Ben Shapiro has such a problem with it in politics. Not only that, but I think the people that pay him a lot have a problem with it too. So I mentioned that empathy shapes my politics. Empathy shapes my position on healthcare. I believe healthcare is a human right and that every single person should be guaranteed healthcare. We live in a system that prioritizes profit over people. The reason why we don't guarantee healthcare to all our citizens is because the healthcare industry, the pharmaceutical industry, and all their lobbyists donate massive amounts of money to both the Democrats and the Republicans in order to maintain the status quo by keeping everything privatized so they can continue making money by denying people care because that's how they make money. Maximizing profits is their sole objective. In a public healthcare system, which would save tens of thousands of lives and trillions of dollars potentially, that's just not in their best interests. Can't have that. Empathy drives my political opinions on immigration. Not only is immigration actually better for our economy, and we rely on immigration for a lot of our jobs because we actually get away with paying people a lot less for work that non-immigrants would do, illegal or otherwise. Also because we're a melting pot. We have plenty of room here. The biggest arguments against immigration are, well, they're going to take your jobs. They're going to take your job. When in reality, all your jobs are being shipped away overseas to places like Asia, China, India, Taiwan, Korea. Because like I said, our system prioritizes profits over people. If they can get away with saving a buck by having some worker in China fill a job at one of their factories in China, they'll do it. What's the point of staying in America to do that if they can just get away with it overseas? It's another reason why conservatives hate labor unions so much because, oh no, the working class actually wants to be treated better and given fair wages and all that. Yeah, empathy, right?
Vote red, right?
Empathy shapes my politics when it comes to prison. We have a lot of prisons in this country that are privatized and rely on keeping people locked up so that the owners of the prison that make money off of keeping people locked up make more money. It's kind of why we have the highest prison population per capita out of anywhere in the world. And it's also why our cops indiscriminately target black and brown individuals and then lock them up. Our system prioritizes profit over people. The 13th Amendment never abolished slavery. We just enslaved people by getting prisoners to do cheap work for us. Abolish private prisons. Abolish mandatory minimum sentences. Legalize drugs. Conservatives have this hyperfixation on crime and punishment, never rehabilitation, because that requires empathy. That requires feeling bad for people and putting yourselves in the shoes of people that are downtrodden. For decades and decades, districts are gerrymandered and gentrified and redlined in order to easily reallocate funding and resources in a city by designated and outlining which districts, which parts of a city remain impoverished, basically. And these communities are indiscriminately black and brown. And also, they're the most heavily policed. Why are black and brown people getting arrested so often? I am able to have empathy for these people. Being raised in an impoverished neighborhood, and we wonder why gangs are formed, we wonder why crime is prominent in these areas. Yet when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez brings it up, like, hey, we're going to see a rise in crime because of the increase in poverty due to the eviction crisis that's looming over us right now, she gets called a fucking bitch by one of her representatives. And you have other conservative representatives and senators saying, poverty isn't linked to crime. That's nuts. That's disgusting. That really triggers me. Ugh. Even though it's a fact. If Ben Shapiro was smart, he would probably know that. But he doesn't. He doesn't even think systemic racism is real. It's because he's a conservative. His entire income relies on him not understanding basic things. Or complex things, for that matter. Empathy drives my position on drugs and the drug war. drug gangs and cartels, people that get thrown into a life of crime south of the border and Central America and all that. All because America and all these other countries outlaw drugs, and we throw people in jail for using drugs and distributing drugs. Humans are going to do drugs. We have coffee, we have alcohol, we have cigarettes, we have marijuana, which isn't legal everywhere, of course. I'm able to empathize with people who want to do drugs, because who doesn't want to get out of their mind and just get away from this dark, twisted world every now and again, huh? But hey, yeah, let's just continue shaming people who become addicts, and let's just not help them out, because who can... Empathy? Pfft, that's stupid. Legalizing drugs would not only save tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of lives, drastically reduce the crime rate, put a huge damper on human trafficking, but it would also be a massive benefit to the economy. You can make an industry out of marijuana and certain amphetamines. But no, we live in a society. We live in a world that's completely obsessed with crime and punishment, and it's been that way for way too long. So the final point I'll make is this. If empathy isn't the main driving factor of your politics, if you're not representing your constituents because you care about other human beings, if you hold apathy towards people that you don't even know, if you can't empathize with the struggle and plight of everyday people, if you're incapable of imagining yourself in someone else's shoes, of imagining being worse off, imagining being impoverished or hungry or struggling, if you're incapable of empathy and you're just into politics for selfish reasons to get popular or clout or money, then you shouldn't be there. There's no reason for you to be there while countless other people can fill your shoes and do a much better job. But conservatism is kind of a cult. It indoctrinates you into not giving a crap about anybody. It's not caring about other human beings and making the world a better place. So long as the people you work for keep getting richer, and and as long as you keep on spouting these myths that, if you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, the system isn't oppressive, it's not racist, it's not discriminatory, anyone can make it. When that's proven to be false time and time again. The system is put in place to keep the rich rich and to keep the poor poor. Profits over people. That's how it works. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. In due time, I'll be getting actual equipment and stuff. Check out my other videos if you haven't. It would mean a lot to me. Yeah, I mean, just care about people.